Antoinette Griffin, welcome to Titans of Transition today.
Hello, Joe. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you. And of course, we know each other from the John Maxwell team. I'm really pleased to have you on the show because I think you have a unique message for us of going from an employee to an entrepreneur. So tell us what that means to you.
Oh my gosh, Joe. We all have in our lives, when we start out working, what our goals are. And my goal was to just really be like a customer service manager at a call center. That was my goal,
Call
was
center.
to provide good customer service, lead people, work at a big call center, and that was really my professional goal when I was starting out.
What kind of organization were you at?
Well, I used to work at Blue Cross Blue Shield,
Oh boy.
so
Yeah,
that was I
I'm sure
started
you had a
off.
good call center there.
Yeah, lots of interesting calls. And then, it was eventually to be like I said, a leader of a call center of like a national company. Always wanted to work for a big company. And so that really was my goal. So I didn't have these extravagant goals of having my own business by any means.
How did you come to the conclusion that you wanted to venture out and do something entrepreneurial?
Well, I didn't.
You didn't.
So my husband, John Griffin, at the time, we had just been married a few years, and he had always had a very entrepreneurial spirit. And so we both had and still have a love for senior citizens. So he decided to come up with an idea for a business for senior citizens. And he was like, hey, so what do you think? One of us is going to have to take the plunge and work this business full time
Wow.
because, we can't do this just on our lunch hours. Somebody's got to be committed to this. And basically, I wasn't really loving my job at that point. I was just
Mhm.
basically going through the motions. Plus, he made more money than I did. And so I thought, well, it makes sense for me to be the one
To take the
to
risk,
say, yes, to
and
say
he's the
goodbye.
foundation, the
Yes,
backstop financially. Yeah, yeah.
yes.
So you launched off, and you hinted at something. You weren't really feeling excited about your position at the time. So I'm just kind of curious about that. Can we kind of dig into that a little bit? What was the situation that caused you to feel like you wanted to make a change anyway, away from what you were doing?
Well, I don't know. At the beginning, it's like I didn't know what I wanted next, but I think that a lot of people are in that situation where they're in a comfortable job,
Mm.
drawing a good salary, doing things that are in their comfort zone that they get some enjoyment in. But when they look at the day to day, that they look at, oh my gosh, I'm really not happy and I'm really just working to Friday, or
Mm.
working till 5 o'clock and working, not being lazy, but really working, but not really getting any fulfillment from it. And I basically didn't know there were any other options out there until, like I said, he came up with the idea for this business, and then I took the leap and left, which I never saw myself doing that.
That's, it's interesting because you were just talking about going through the motions and kind of being on this weekly cycle and waiting till Friday. Getting a sense of what's right for us is really interesting. So I have this idea of gifts and people having gifts. I'm a person of faith, so gifts from God. And we're not really fulfilled until we're really stepping into those gifts. So I'm wondering now if it's segueing into you moving into this entrepreneurial venture. Was there something that was in what you were going to do that you felt like aligned with your skills or maybe even your gifts?
No, not really,
Not
because,
really, huh?
The main thing was that, well, it was a publication and I love to write, but the main skill that it required was sales, right? Just any
Oh,
business.
wow. Yeah.
If it's any small business, you got to get out there and sell. And so, I remember a mentor of ours asking me. He said, "Well, okay, so you're going to be the salesperson for this business. Have you ever sold anything before?" And I said, "Well, Girl Scout cookies." And I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm not this aggressive person. I'm not this, extroverted, very, charismatic person," when I pictured salespeople. And
Hmm.
so I thought, how is this going to work? Because not only is that not my personality, but I've never done anything like this before. So it was definitely out of my comfort zone. So no, I can't say that I had these skills and I was
Hmm.
moving towards this for this reason. But I just took it one day at a time,
Okay.
and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm so proud of what I did as well.
So you felt stretched by it, and so what ended up happening? I mean, how did you? I mean, businesses do need business development and sales, and so when you're an entrepreneur, you were wearing all hats, so you had to do that. You had to pick things up, I'm sure. But how did you get
Yeah.
through that?
Well, there's something, Joe, about when you don't know things, you tend to do things that are outside the edges because you don't know what the edges are. So, that was back when, we were all still using phone books, and I would just get the phone book and I would think, okay, I think today I'm going to start with the A's and I'm going to call some accountants in the phone book here. And so I would just go down the list and I would call people.
Hmm.
Whereas it's so funny because, these days we talk about, oh, you got to qualify your leads, and, you do this stuff ahead of time, and you had to have a funnel, and you put stuff out there, and then, you then approach somebody with selling. I would just call people up out of the phone book and say, "Hey, this is my product. Would you like to meet on it?" And, looking back going, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was any other way.
Hmm.
So that was the way that I did it.
And so what ended up happening? I mean, did that organization grow? Did you end up making another shift later? I mean, kind of what was the outcome of that scenario?
Yeah. So we ended up that business lasted 18 years.
Wow.
And we ended up selling it after 18 years. So we expanded it. We started in Austin, Texas. We expanded it down into San Antonio and then Fort Worth and Dallas, and ended up hiring other salespeople. But I did the sales in Austin for all of those 18 years. So I stayed on the front lines. But yeah, when I look back in the beginning, oh my gosh, it was very difficult. And just like you, I'm a person of faith too, and I honestly believe that the Lord and me and John in our prayers and praying that this would work. The Lord blessed that, but
Wow.
it
Yeah.
also required me to get out there and do the work too.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes too, I think we assume that certain things we do have to be done in a very specific way. I found out in my career that I was a big risk taker and more a visionary, and I tended to have to trick myself into taking interest in things that I had to do, like budgeting, for example. I hated budgeting. And budgeting is so step by step and so analytical, and I'm an intuitive, and I'm like, ugh. So I changed the way I did budgeting every year. So I think I'll use this tool this year to start my budget, just to get enough energy going to power myself through the process. And then once I was moving, I could get the things done that I had to get done. And then I also learned that, well, I'm not particularly good at doing certain things, so I enlisted people to do them for me. So I'm wondering how you worked with your own personal wiring through that process, through that business?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would tell myself is back when I was making those cold calls, and I would I'm very process minded, and so I would make tick marks, and I would make tick marks of how many calls I had made, and at the end of the day, it would be like, oh my gosh, I made 35 calls and I only got 2 appointments. And then I would have to tell myself, Antoinette, that's 2 appointments more than you had before you made these 35 calls. So it was just this paradigm shift for me. And then sometimes it was, okay, today I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make cold calls, from this time to this time, and just parenting myself and forcing myself to go through those processes. And it did work, and I did learn that you don't have to be this aggressive salesperson. You don't
Right.
have to be this extreme extroverted, outgoing person in order for you to be good in sales and for people to want to buy from you.
So talk a little bit about the introversion, the extroversion, and you just had you just published a another video on YouTube. You had ambiverts and what was the other category?
Omniverts.
Omniverts, which I think is fascinating. So tell us a little bit about that and how you got into and being interested in this particular area.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So my life tagline that I gave for myself is formerly shy, forever introverted. And because I used to be terribly, terribly shy, and most people don't know the difference between shyness and introversion. Shyness is this fear of social judgment. So you're shy because you're afraid of how you'll come across, or you'll say the wrong thing, or the kind of impression, or what will people think of me. And I say fear. For some people it is a fear. For other people it's just an uncomfortable feeling. But either way, that's shy. Whereas introversion is just you're in your head, you're thinking things through, you can't be around a lot of people and a lot of noise and a lot of activity for long periods of time. But it's like I talk about in that video, it's a spectrum. It's not just, oh, this introvert's like every other introvert. Some people are more introverted than others. And same thing with extroverts. And then ambiverts is somebody that's kind of close to the line between introversion and extroversion, and they kind of dance between the two, just because their personality. They can be an extrovert in certain situations. They're more introverted in other situations, but they're not extreme. And then the omnivert is extreme. They're like one day they wake up and or in this situation, they're an extreme extrovert. And the next time you see them, they may be extremely introverted. So it can be very confusing for people, going, oh my gosh, this person's acting completely different. So that's the differences between them. But you said, how did, I get involved? Like I said, kind of moving from that formerly shy person to realizing, okay, I am introverted, and celebrating that and helping other people that feel misunderstood, or, confusing shyness and introversion. Or some introverts are like, hey, I really do want to get out of my comfort zone. It's just very difficult. And so I love to come up with strategies for introverts, because I know how it feels. I know what it's like to have your energy depleted and have other people totally not understand that.
Yeah, my wife is an introvert. I kind of am, I flip flop depending on the situation, I guess. And maybe that's ambivert. But Barb is definitely an introvert. And after a little while, she has to just be alone. And
Yes.
I've learned over the years, just let her be.
Yes.
Let her recharge. Let her do whatever she needs to do to refresh herself, and not take it wrong, because sometimes there's a withdrawal. There's a kind of a withdrawal thing that happens.
Right.
And it's weird because early on, I thought, how can she possibly say she's an introvert? Because she was a performer when we were young. She was a musician. She had leads in musicals. She taught music. She still, she plays piano and sings. And so it's kind of like, how can you be upfront and be an introvert? It's those old paradigms that we've heard, getting back to your statement about confusing shyness, as being the driving definition of an introvert. I think that doesn't serve us well, understanding those things.
Yes, and actually, even though I was terribly shy growing up, I wanted to be in plays. I wanted to act. I loved that because I was performing. So it wasn't me. It wasn't the Antoinette shy me. I could pretend like I was somebody else.
Ah, yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting layer there. So, all right. So you sold the business after 18 years, something like that?
Yeah.
So what then?
So that's interesting because after 18 years, that's like raising a child, right? And and it was such a big part of my identity. It really was my identity because my husband and I don't have children. And so this was like our child once we got married, and we raised this child and then sent it off to college, or in this case, sold it. And so that was my identity. So I had gotten certified as a speaker, coach, trainer through the Maxwell Leadership team. But when I would go out and introduce myself, or when people would ask me, what do you do? I would say, well, I'm a coach, speaker, trainer. And I used to own, and I would say the name of the business, and I would start explaining what I had done. And I would realize when I was doing it, I was thinking, Antoinette, you don't do this anymore. Why do you continue to do that? And I realized it was because that was my identity, and that's how people in the professional community knew me. So it was this other transition of, moving from having that business to somebody who wasn't well known in this other area of expertise.
So you got certified, you joined the Maxwell team before you sold the business.
Yes.
Is that right?
6 years before selling it. Yes.
So were you doing coaching and
yes,
speaking, other things? So what caused you to do that on the side while you were still running the other business?
Oh, because I've always been into personal growth. Just always been into personal growth, and by that time the glamour of having the other business was fading.
It was fading.
Because, yeah, and so I wasn't getting as much enjoyment out of it anymore. So seeing, okay, do I really want to be doing this 10 years from now? And realizing that, in the beginning, I thought I did. In the beginning, I thought, oh my gosh, I want to do this forever. But like so much happens in our lives, it was a good season. And so I was ready to do something else.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a long period of time in today's standards, And I was in a career, I was headed up IT, but if you had a tenure of 5 years, you were like an old person in your position, because nobody ever, there was so much turnover. 18 years is a long time. So that's really interesting. So when did you and John both move into the Maxwell team full time? Because you have Griff Development too. So I'm wondering did that come up before you sold the business? Was Griff Development?
Yes, it was before. Yes. So we both got certified at the same time. So we started that new business
at that time,
Griff Development, while we had our other business. Yes.
Got it. Yeah. So that's interesting. So now you're doing this, and of course you're in a leadership position. Both of you are in leadership position in the Maxwell team, and you've been doing that for quite a while now, and there's so much going on there. So, but then you decided to dabble in the YouTube area too, and start your podcast as well. So, is this just a natural extension of getting your influence out there, or did you feel like there was something else nudging you into being a content creator like that?
Oh, well, first of all, I do not have a podcast, only YouTube.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And I love writing, and I've always loved content creation. And so once again, John, my husband, said, you should probably record videos, rather than just send out a written newsletter. And so I started recording videos and of my content, and then realized, well, I'm creating these videos, but the only people that are seeing them are people that are on like my email list. And so that's when we got the idea of why not record them on YouTube. So I started doing that very slowly and was only doing one a month. And then 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I went to twice a month. And then a little less than 1 year ago, I went to one a week.
Yeah, that's quite, I mean, it's doing that myself. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. People may not understand that. And especially the quality content you put out, I must say. Your content on your channel is more than just that, though. I mean, you give other tips besides just talking about introverts and things of that nature, don't you?
Yes, it's all around communication, confidence, charisma, leadership, from an introvert's perspective. So some of it is having to do with, for introverts, some of it's having to do with understanding introverts. I just made one just yesterday of how to prevent from overwhelming an introvert during the holidays. And so some of it really is for more people that are extroverted but want to build relationships and connection with introverts. But yeah, so much of it has to do with, I find body language just fascinating. So much of it has to do with, body language tips, and appearing confident and charismatic. But I like to do everything from, a inward, authentic way rather than, oh, do this if you want to, manipulate somebody. It's never about.
Yes, that's, things like mirroring, you've got to check your ethics, you don't want,
Yes. Because even
it's powerful.
mirroring
Yeah.
can be done in a good way. And,
absolutely.
for people that don't know what that is, it's, where you're mimicking. Well, mimicking is probably not a good word, someone else's, body language, but it can be done in a good way if you're really trying to connect with that person.
Right.
Like, if they move in and then you move in, but not to manipulate.
Right. Yeah. So there's definitely responsibility there. So those are powerful concepts. If you were to think back, what advice would you give to your, let's say, 22-year-old self? We'll pick 22 this time. Well, if you were starting over again with all your sage wisdom that you have today.
Let's see. At 22, I was in a stable job. Like I said, just saw myself as, with that employee mentality. Not that there's anything wrong with employees or having an employee mentality, but I didn't know there was more. I think it's always good for people to, if they want to make that choice, to say, no, I don't want to be a business owner. I would prefer to be an employee. But to me, that I didn't think that was something that I was even capable of. And so to realize, going back and realizing that, it is, yes, it's out of the comfort zone, but it's another area of life that I could do if I did it in little bitty steps and just did day by day. It's, still going to be stressful. It's still going to be hard, but being able to push myself. I think that's one of the most important things that I would tell myself.
Push yourself towards the edge a little bit. Try to move away from your comfort zone.
Yes.
You don't have to dive off a cliff, but you can take deliberate moves away from your comfort zone, because really growth is out there.
Exactly. And I'm very risk averse and, that safety and security. And so it does take a lot of effort to get me there. Even still, to this day, I would love to be the kind of person that takes more risks. And in working with my coach, she's able to help me get there, which I really appreciate because it's difficult to do if I only have to answer to myself.
Right. Right. But I think just drilling into that a little bit, we are wired as human beings to maintain stasis or stay in the safe and the comfort areas. And I think that often the answers aren't there. And so having some strategy, having some way to venture out and even try things out. Sometimes I've coached people before where they're not sure what shift they want to make career-wise, but they know they want to make a change, but they're stuck because they're so afraid that they'll make a mistake. And so I'll say, well, what's a half step you could make to find out if that particular area is of interest? Why don't you set up an information interview, or let me help you set up a conversation with someone who's doing that and chat with them to see whether or not that appeals, or try to understand more about it. So it's taking those smaller steps in that direction is helpful, because you tend to view these shifts as huge, giant steps, and that you can't even entertain them unless you dive off the cliff. But that's really not true. And I think building some confidence and some muscle towards moving to that non-safe zone, or out of your comfort zone, we would say, is really helpful when you're exploring, what to do next, exploring what your next transition might be.
Yes, and I love the way you said that, the half step. Erica Hilliard, who is the author of It's Living Fully with Anxiety and Living. I cannot remember the name of the book.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, good.
Don't worry.
But it is Erica Hilliard. And she writes in that book, it's a quote that I absolutely love, and that's, no step is too small as long as it's a step outside of your comfort zone, and knowing that any step is going to bring on anxiety. Because that's what it's meant to do if it's out of your comfort zone, but it's not too small if it is outside of your comfort zone.
Right. Yeah, that's really powerful. Do you have any active projects or things that you're currently working on that you're excited about? I'm surprising you on this one. I'm sorry.
Well, that leads to another transition, Joe, that because I know this is all about transitions. So my husband and I moved from Austin to Atlanta 5 weeks before the pandemic started. So February of 2020. And so that's been a huge transition, because I grew up in Austin and Texas. And so it was moving across the country, not knowing very many people, not knowing anybody on a social basis, and then starting over as far as creating a business here. I still have clients in Texas, which is great. Mm-hmm. But starting, all over, with new neighbors, with new friends, with new, clients. And so that's been really unique, getting out there and networking, from going from a city where I would go to a networking group and I was bound to run into people I knew, to going to a new city and nobody knows who I am or what I do. And so that's been a real transition. And so still doing a lot of work virtually, which is good, but trying to get more and more plugged into the community.
That is tough. And we don't often talk about that. I don't often talk about that in terms of transitions, but I think we've had 10 homes we've bought. So my poor wife has had to do geography transitions way too many times. Not all of those were moves state to state, but there were enough of them. And, it's hard, because you have relationships with friends in the community, your church, And you have to restart all those things too, in addition to the business side of things and the clients as well. So those are challenges. Those are big things. Moving back to Atlanta, was that getting closer to Maxwell team headquarters or anything like that?
Yes, because John,
because
my
John took
husband,
another
works
role.
directly with the organization.
Yeah.
Yes.
So any final thoughts and takeaways that you would want to share on this episode?
I think that, from employee to entrepreneurs, if you've ever, thought, oh my gosh, what would it be like starting a business or owning a business? Just like you said, Joe, take a step out of your comfort zone. Go set up a meeting with somebody and find out a little bit more, kind of explore what it is that you want to do, and see if that opportunity grows bigger, or if it's like, oh, you know what? I don't even really think I do want to do this anymore. So many times, right? We think we want to do something, and then we realize once we've started down the path that it's really not for us. But at least and there's so much to say for that, as far as finding out. And then I guess the other thing is, just not doubting yourself and realizing that you're capable of so much more. And, it helps so much to look back on where we've come. We all talk about looking forward in front of us. I remember reading a Facebook post of a woman that I know who she had gotten ill, and she almost died, and she had posted on Facebook, about her journey and everything. And she finally did this one post, and she said, what keeps me going is looking back to see how far I've come, rather than how everybody says, only look ahead of you, don't look behind you. But when we look behind us, that helps give us the confidence to move ahead.
I am so glad you brought that up, because I view that the same way too. I really do. It's when I've approached something that I thought was daunting, it's good to remind yourself what you have accomplished in the past that you've gotten through, that you thought was daunting at that time when you were moving into it, that, it's going to be okay, on the other side. So I love that. And you're right. Most of the time you read on this, you hear people talk about it. It's all like, focus forward. Don't let and the context they're talking about is valid as well. But I think by painting with too broad a stroke about that rear view mirror kind of perspective, they miss this one about how we can really take encouragement about what we've done in the past. So I just love that. That's great. And I also wanted to go back to the first point you were making, talking about, stepping out of your comfort zone, and remembering that you said the way you were wired, you were very process oriented when you were doing that senior business, and the sales was a little bit like, but you were very process oriented. So you had these little steps that you repeated faithfully, and there were small bite-sized steps probably, but you just kept at it. And so I think that's also very, very good advice as well to fold in there, is that break it up, as best you can. Think through what are those small steps, and walk down that path, and see where it leads. And if it you don't get joy out of it, and you don't feel alignment out of it after a while, then stop. It's
exactly.
No harm, no foul.
Yes.
No harm, no foul. Now you know.
Exactly.
You've learned something, which is a huge benefit.
Right.
Rather than, I think one of the biggest things I fear, in a way, so I'll use the word fear, is I don't want to get to the end of my life with regrets for not trying something that I should have, And of course, my wife would say you should dance more. But anyway, we won't go there.
Well, you're saying it, Joe. There. Yes. You're regretting not dancing more.
Yeah. There's that song, We Should Get Up and Dance, which is kind of in the same spirit. I can't remember I have to put that in the show notes, but I love that song. Anyway, this has been a real pleasure. I really appreciate it. So why don't we take a second, and I'll pop this up on screen, and just call out your web address or where people can reach you for more information?
Oh, yes. So it's griffdevelopment.com.
Great.
And my YouTube channel is Antoinette Griffin.
All right. Awesome. All right. And I'll have it in the show notes as well as I'll pop it up on screen. And so with that, Antoinette, thank you so much for coming on Titans of Transition. You are a Titan with some major positive transitions. So again, we're so pleased to have you.
Thank you, Joe.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information.